Predator. South China Sea, written by Jeff Vandermeer and published by D.H. Press. First kill. Gostat pulled his chair closer to the slit in the blind and put the cool rubber of his old U.S. Army binoculars to his eyes. Yes, there was the rhino, looking very nervous, and that there, off to the right, that shimmering fractal outline. What the hell was that? Suddenly, a blue beam leapt out from the shimmer. The rhino's flanks exploded in a horrible rubble of blood and bone, the splatter erupting in every direction. It sank onto its ruined haunches, confused and bleeding in distress. Blood poured like rainwater driven across asphalt by a push broom. "Jesus Christ on a stick!" Tao hissed. A second blue beam slammed into the rhino, driving the end of its spine out of its body and obliterating more flesh. It screamed. Once. The sound tore through all of them, even Gustat. The rhino slumped in shock, framed by the long grass and the blue sky. "Fuck it! I'm out of here," Boreas said. He pushed past Gustat, half knocking him over, and then the other two were out the flaps of the blind, running for it. Gustat couldn't fault the impulse, and followed as they hightailed it out of the blind and scrambled into the jeep that had brought them there. Still, Gustat looked back toward the blind. A wavery, fractured shape stood there, the same color as the dark wooden planks behind it. Gustat felt a kind of mixed excitement and dread. It did see us, and it wanted us to see it. Prologue. Somewhere in the South China Sea, a monstrous shape strode through the bowels of the freighter, moving with stealth and speed as it tracked small red humanoid splotches using the display embedded in its helmet. It extinguished them, quick as thought. Its combat armor was gray-white, with hundreds and hundreds of scars. The helmet had been blasted by plasma weapons and lasers so many times that the welter of sporling, gouging, and stippling seemed to describe lost nebulae of death and destruction. Along the torso lay the tattoos from dozens of knife blades. Pale, thin lines, confirming not the strength of the armor so much as the ability of the wearer to recover from the wounding, the bleeding. Burrowing holes, gray and black, punctuated the impromptu designs across the chest and stomach plates, the discharge of countless projectile weapons, some more successful than others. Countless wars, countless hunts, countless trophies. Some of the blood on the Predator's armor wasn't old, it was fresh and bright. As it moved down the corridor, oblivious to the screams, the shock of bone and flesh separated, red shapes leaking into gray. It picked up more spatter. Along the arms and legs, where it had sheathed more than a dozen blades, still more signs of struggle, of desperate life-or-death battles on 100 worlds, under single suns and double, under purple moons, in deserts, in jungles, on lava fields and ice flows, on barren piles of rock that had no atmosphere, beneath the pathetic meandering eye of a white dwarf star. Always repaired, always the same armor. By now, it was memory and conquest and intimidation all at once, all 7 feet of it, all 400 pounds inhabiting it. Some, the Predator killed with the plasma cannon before they could run far. Others, he brought close and ended by knife and claw. Some fought well. Some fought poorly, but they all died. Every single one would die by morning. There was no doubt. There had never been any doubt. All night the voice had crackled and whispered over the ocean, and through the walkie-talkie held by Sukon Ditakar aboard her ship, the Shady Lady, currently registered to a fake company in Liberia. "Everyone's dead, Sukon, but it's still here. It's still here." Sukon would respond in as calm a voice as she could manage, followed by a pause, and then back would come her sister's voice saying, "Hurry, hurry, please, come soon," in a tone so dead and dry that it made Sukon shudder. All through the night, they tracked Faransi 5, the Singapore-registered freighter Sukon had sent her sister and 20 men to rob in their largest speedboat. Virot, her first mate when Suchin wasn't on the ship, stood beside her. A squat, muscular man with jet-black hair like Bruce Lee and massive thighs from balancing on decks his whole life. Through the darkness and the heavy seas they traveled, with nothing for her to do except let the worry become an ache inside of her. The ships should have been closer, but the weather, which was beginning to subside, had driven them apart. Now it was dawn, 50 miles or more off the coast of Thailand, halfway to Indonesia, and the sun lay like a dull pearl on the horizon, a thin spiral of black smoke rising through it from the deck of the tanker, while the Shady Lady bucked and fell, buffeted by the chop. The smell of oil and brine laced the air. The Shady Lady's protesting engine whined and throbbed somewhere beneath them, sending a vibration through the railing. Toward dawn, her sister's voice had faded, and there had only been screams before Sukon cut short the last call. Sukon's hands tightened in a vice-like grip on the rail of the foredeck as Virote stared through the binoculars. Now she wished she'd trusted her instincts, gone after a different target. Also in these waters lay a remote island run by Rath Preep, an ex-Khmer Rouge colonel, as an expensive hunting lodge for wealthy businessmen and criminals. They'd reached a deal with Preep to resupply the Shady Lady once before, so she'd seen the lodge, noted the possibilities. But since he had a small army on the island, the Faransi 5 had seemed a better bet. Now she wasn't so sure. The freighter was a black bulk, listing aimlessly in the water and growing steadily larger. Below Sukon, her crew busied themselves with fighting the waves, checking and loading their Kalashnikovs, while strapping on a deadly assortment of knives of all sizes and ages. In the cramped quarters below deck, hand-to-hand combat was all but certain, depending on what they were fighting. Sukon had to show strength now. Their last attack had ended in near disaster, with Thai Navy cutters closing fast, and the ship they'd targeted putting up unexpected resistance. She'd lost 4 members of the crew. Without Suchin and Virot's support, she might already have woken to a bullet in the brain. "There's the speedboat," Virot said to Sukon in Thai. "See it, right where it should be." Now she could see it with the naked eye, securely lashed to the side of the freighter, but empty. No signs of life, although the angle was so extreme they could only see as far as the railing of the top deck. A vast cyclone of seagulls circled above. They only had a few hours, at best, before the Thai Navy came sniffing around. Piracy carried a stiffer penalty, now that it had begun to make inroads into Western trade. Sukon pulled out the old magazine from her AK-74, put a full one back in, set it for semi-automatic. She'd personalized the grip with an old Buddhist symbol meaning peace of mind. The AK-74 made a lot of noise. It terrified people. She liked that. "Prepare the boat," she said. She felt sick to her stomach. That was her sister out there, somewhere on the ship in trouble. Yet, she could only wait and watch until they were close enough. The last routine call from Suchin had confirmed that they'd rounded up the crew and now controlled the ship. For this reason, she hadn't worried that much when the weather pulled them off course and away from the tanker. The strange, panicked calls for help had started soon thereafter, while they were battling to make any headway at all. Now that they were within a few hundred yards, Virot shouted an order, and the crew brought the Shady Lady around, so it was roughly parallel to the tanker. It rose above them like an impregnable wall, except usually you could breach that wall with just a speedboat full of desperate men and women armed with AK-47s. Here, in the wash from the tanker, the waves got even choppier, so they had to be careful not to get too close. Nothing would turn potential disaster into catastrophe, like smashing into the side of the Faranzi 5. Wouldn't they have gotten a signal off to the mainland if there was an accident? She asked. Virote put down the binoculars. Not if Suchin got there first. Sukon saw the worry in his strange blue-green eyes. Virote had gotten the contacts at a knockoff shop in Bangkok. Besides the dye in his hair, they were his only affectation. And not if something got to Suchin after that. "We're going in," she said suddenly. Virot's eyes widened in surprise. "But we don't know." "I don't care," she said. "I'm going, and as many as we can fit in the second speedboat. Have them prepare the third, too, just in case. You're staying here." "I should go with you," Virot said. Sometimes they slept together. That didn't give him the right to argue with her in front of the crew. "No," Sukon said. "Second mate Fikdai will go with me." Delicate, because Fikdai was a former lover, tawny-limbed, big dark eyes. But she couldn't risk Virot on the Faranzi 5. She needed someone steadfastly loyal to her on the Shady Lady at all times. "I don't think—" "That's an order!" They all knew the ruthless way she'd become the captain. Virot complied quickly. The climb up the ladder that clung to the side of the Faranzi 5 was among the longest of Sukon's life. It was more like climbing up through a rusted tunnel that smelled of motor oil, sweat, puke, and fish, while it all swayed back and forth. It was really just the ship in the waves. But to her it felt like the ladder moving. The whole time, Sukon was thinking of what she and Suchin had endured growing up on the streets of Bangkok, sold by their parents into a kind of indentured servitude in Cambodia, so vile they'd escaped the first chance they had and crossed the border. The people they'd had to bribe, sleep with, and kill just to get a little bit of light, like the light above her that marked the top of the tanker's hull. In that moment on the ladder, with the salt spray exhausting itself against her face, Sukon realized she already knew that Suchin was gone. She'd known it when the first of the strange walkie-talkie transmissions had come in, and when they'd ended. She'd known it when the first sliver of dawn came through the window of her tiny cabin as she watched the horizon and tried to meditate past the chaos and darkness in her mind. Above her, Fikdai, fluid as water, reached the top, cried out, and tried to turn back. Sukon grabbed the dagger stuck through her belt and jabbed him with the point. "Go, you idiot, or we'll all fall!" Her legs had begun to shake from the exertion or the stress. Up, up, and over the side he went, Sukon tumbling out beside him, and into a scene from a nightmare. "Cover each other!" Sukon shouted, as she stood up and saw what Fikdai saw. As they came up, weapons at the ready, the crew members fanned out, taking up positions behind bulkhead, crates, and emergency lifeboats. They all saw what lay strewn across the middle of the deck. The remains of over 20 people. It looked like a slaughterhouse. Beside her, Fikdai let loose with a stream of old Thai curse words, followed by a barked order to the men, who had looked for a second like they might go back down the ladder. The smell hit like a body blow, took the wind from Sukon's lungs. She gasped for air, put a hand over her mouth, fighting the urge to be sick. Even Fikdai was close to retching. The deck was thick and sticky with blood, almost black against the gray metal. The blood had splotched and splattered against the surface, dotted, sprayed. The flesh containers the blood had come from lay torn and gutted and oddly burned, great black swaths running through their ruined bodies across the deck. Faces on savaged heads were caught in mid-scream, mid-plea. A few torsos sat like statues from Khmer ruins, nothing but stomachs, chests, and necks, heads stolen from them. The bodies were at times intermingled in their death throes, so that Sukon could not tell what belonged where. The meat had begun to stink and flies to settle. Funny, now that she'd seen the worst, a kind of calm came over her, the sounds around her fading before the pulsing of her own heartbeat. People have died. People always died. It came with the job description. Death she didn't mind. It was the not knowing. For a moment she wandered through the dead, searching for someone she did not find. Someone not on the deck. "Take over here, Feekdai," she said in a voice that she knew was too calm, that made the crew look at her strangely. "I am going to find my sister. You, come with me." She gestured to two men. They hesitated, but came forward. "What if it is still on board?" Feekdai asked her, whispering in her ear. It? Why not them? Yet she too had been thinking it, although she couldn't imagine what it might look like. For a flickering moment, she had a vague idea of a bear or wolf or a feral human being. "They all had weapons, Sukon," Feekdai said. She knew he was asking that she not leave the deck. This protectiveness began to anger her. "I'll see you below," was her only answer. Below, at the far end of a corridor of bulkheads leading to the ship's cafeteria, Sukon found Suchin, still clutching an AK-47, crumpled against the wall, her beautiful face distorted by what looked like claw marks. They'd followed a trail of blood and the dead to find her. Next to Suchin sat a woman in a bloodied sarong, holding her baby, insane and babbling. "A demon came! A demon came and took them! A demon came! A demon!" Sukon had seen no one else living, but she only had eyes for her sister. She stared down at Suchin and said to her men, "Leave me, and take the madwoman with you. Keep her safe. She knows who did this." Twitchy, terrified, the two went, the survivors with them. It didn't really matter if they were with her or not, Sukon realized. If whatever had done this was still there, 2 bodyguards wouldn't help her. When the cries of the woman were just a wandering echo vibrating through the passageways, joined to the odd groans and creaks common to any ship, Sukon shuddered, began to cry. She hunched down against the wall and sat beside her sister, slipping a little in the blood. They'd expected this so many times before, on the streets, at the hands of abusive men, in the countryside, starving. So many times. Just not now, when they had finally gained some control over their lives. "Someday, Suchin," Sukon had always said to her younger sister whenever things seemed hopeless, "someday we will have our own house. We will be our own bosses. No one will tell us what to do. We'll be free of all of this." Now, Suchin was free, just as Sukon was still free to pace the deck of her pirate ship like a caged animal and prey off of the corporations that sent their products to the west across the vast and dangerous seas. Sukon wiped the blood from Suchin's face with her sleeve and gently pulled her sister's eyes open so she could see her way through the afterlife. Then she took Suchin's right hand in hers, ignoring the smell. Her sister's hand, curled into a fist, was so cold. But there was something nestled in that fist, something strangely hot. Sukon pulled away instinctively, and in doing so, loosened her sister's grip. The thing came loose. It hit the deck with a wet clatter. Sukon leaned over to look at it in the dim light. A piece of reddish-white metal. Hazy, when she looked at it directly, coming into focus only from the corner of her eye. A piece of the demon? Or of the demon's clothing? She got to her knees and put both hands over it as if it were a slippery gecko she had to trap. The heat of it was bearable now. She picked up the scrap, felt the lightness of it. Even as small as it was, it looked too heavy to be so light. Sukon stared over at her sister, at the defensive wounds on her hands and arms, wondered vaguely where Suchin's walkie-talkie had gone, and then looked again at the piece of metal as it glowed and pulsed. It hurt to hold it, but Suchin had held on to it, even as she died. Suchin had thought it was important, because it came from her attacker, an attacker who had savagely hacked apart and mutilated over 40 people above and below decks, but left a mother and her baby alone. It made no sense. Again, Sukon heard the mad woman screaming, "A demon!" "I'm sorry I sent you. I'm sorry I didn't go myself," Sukon said. She knew her sister couldn't hear her now, didn't know if she really believed in an afterlife or reincarnation, or just the worms moving lightly through the soil. But there was death, and then there was the death of no one remembering you. A new sound echoed down the passageway. Someone or something was walking toward them. Sukon put the piece of metal in her shirt pocket. The metal hummed with heat next to the rapid beats of her heart. She closed the snap and sat back next to her sister, AK-74 held ready, a pair of reliable 1911 pistols shoved through her belt. The sound became a shadow, which became a figure, which became Fikdai. He stood there looking down at her, aiming his Kalashnikov at the floor. "I'm sorry, Sukon," Fikdai said, and she knew he meant it. Sukon couldn't look him in the eyes, didn't want to see the pity there. "What's it like on the deck?" she asked him. For a moment, the youthful Fikdai looked like an old soul. Many of the bodies are missing their spine and skull. Sukon could feel the old folk tales in her bones now. Ravening demons, come for the unwary. The stone likenesses from 1,000 temples come to life. It was more Hindu than Buddhist, but in this part of the world, people believed in a mix of things. Her walkie-talkie crackled to life. She looked at Fikdai. He stared back, frozen. She checked the channel. "It's Suchin," she whispered. "Don't answer it," Fikdai said. But she'd already pushed the button. Through the static came the sounds of someone pleading, a series of screams, shouts, gasps. Slowly, Sukon realized she was hearing the sounds of Suchin dying. There followed a kind of strange wheezing growl that froze her blood, even as she realized she heard an echo, a doubling of it. Sukon shot to her feet. "It's still here," Fikdai said, pointing down the corridor. A dark figure stood there, framed by the doorways leading to the far mess hall. Impossibly massive, impossibly tall, it wore a mask of terrifying blankness. Tentacles or ropes flared out to either side of the mask. The walkie-talkie snarled, and so did the figure as it began to run toward them. Sukon shoved the walkie-talkie in her pocket, got off a burst from the AK-74, a cacophonous blast in that enclosed space, and then they ran. She led the way. Down the dark and endless corridors they fled. She could hear it behind them, gaining on them, no matter how they twisted and turned in the bowels of the ship. Fikdai, breathing hard. "Do you know where you're going?" Sukon. "Yes, trust me." He turned and fired, the AK-47 chattering right next to her head, deafening her. Still, she didn't look back. Around a corner, they found a ladder to climb up from one level to the next, still hearing the thing behind them somewhere. They climbed to a place where 4 corridors radiated out, and 3 more sets of ladders led upward. The 2 men who had come down with Sukon lay there, almost unrecognizable, burned and blackened by some unknown weapon. There was no sign of the woman and her child, and Sukon wasn't going to look for them now. "Which way?" Phaekdai asked. "Which way?" Sukon looked grim. "I don't know. Maybe up, maybe not." The thudding footsteps of the creature, behind them, close behind. He pushed her up the middle ladder. "Go! Go up!" She went, scurrying as fast as possible. Below her, she heard Phaekdai cursing. The AK-47 had done the impossible and jammed. "Throw me a pistol!" he called up, and she stopped long enough to toss one of her 1911Es to him. He caught it and started firing at something beyond her vision. A few seconds later, she heard a blood-curdling rasping sound, looked down, and saw Phaekdai scream as a blue beam of light shot through his chest. He fell to the ground. Phaekdai. Dead. In its swiftness, his death didn't really register. Instead, all she could think about was the demon that had killed him, coming for her. She found more energy, a surge of speed, nothing in her mind but the circle of light above her. Sukon was breathing so hard she thought her heart would burst, gulping air. Then the light was right there, in front of her. Another burst of strength, and she pulled herself up through the light, back onto the deck, covered in blood and human remains, including the crew members that had come with her. A dark blue beam or light or fire erupted through the space she'd just occupied, searing the edges of the metal. It shot up into the sky, cut through a dozen seagulls. Some evaporated, just disappeared, while others fell to the deck with a sound halfway between a moan and a wet chuckle. That sound horrified Sukon more than anything she'd seen aboard the ship. Behind her, the creature began to emerge from below decks, its impossibly muscular hands gripping the edge. Its huge helmet rose as its forearms, protected by some kind of blood-smeared armor, came into view. The helmet snapped in her direction as the creature kept rising from below, as if it would just keep rising until it blotted out the world. She ran for the railing. A blue beam reached out and nicked the edge of her shirt collar, shot past her and out into the sea. She could feel the weight behind it and the burn. Below her, the water more than 200 feet down, the Shady Lady, a blurry shape in the waves beyond. If she didn't jump far enough, the wind would smash her right back into the side of the hull and she'd be dead instantly. She didn't think, just ditched the AK-74, jumped over the railing and out into the sky, screaming her loss. She plummeted, trying to curl into a ball to protect her head. The water hit and kept hitting. Cold and deep, it felt like a hard muscle around her, buffeting her flesh, enclosing her in silence. But still, the pulsing heat of the tiny piece of metal in her pocket, curling there like a question mark. She kicked out with a scissors stroke, headed for the surface, broke through to air, and opened her eyes, feeling bruised but not broken, a thin trickle of blood running down her face. Sound broke over Sukon in waves. The cry of gulls, the shouts of her men, the slap of water against hull. She treaded water, gasping for breath. She'd surfaced about 40 feet from the side of the freighter, 75 feet from the Shady Lady. Immediately she looked up, trying to see if the creature was still there, but couldn't tell. It was too extreme an angle. When the crew of the Shady Lady reached her, the Firenze 5 burned from somewhere deep in its belly. By the time she was shivering in towels on the deck of her ship, Verot by her side, something huge rose on turrets of flame from the Firenze 5's aft deck, something that had been cloaked or hidden until that moment. It kept rising with a whistling roar, burning the metal beneath it. It looked through the shimmers of heat like some kind of experimental American bomber. But she knew it wasn't American, or Chinese, or Thai, or from anywhere else in the world. As she watched it speed off due south, an exhausted Sukon felt as if it had taken most of her life with it.